Hello everyone, this is Direwolf20 and today's tutorial is on nuclear reactors in industrial craft. Nuclear reactors in industrial craft is practically a mini-game in terms of balancing your nuclear reactor and getting it to do what you want it to do. It's definitely one of the more advanced and more complicated parts of industrial craft, and I'm going to be 100% honest with all you guys. I do not 100% understand how they all work. I've got the basic gist down and I'm going to try and get my point across, but forgive me in advance for if I make any small mistakes during this video tutorial. Please feel free to post and let me know if I forgot something or if I made a mistake, and I'll try and amend it in maybe a part 2 or something like that. But without further ado, let's get started. Nuclear power. Basically, the first thing you need to know is as you go out mining in the world, along with all like the gold and iron and coal and all the cool stuff you're going to find underground, you'll occasionally run into some uranium. And in like diamonds, it breaks down. As soon as you break it, it just drops one piece of uranium ore. It's pretty rare, and it usually spawns in 1 or 2 chunks. Like, you're not going to find more than 1 or 2 sitting right next to each other. And uranium ore is used to create nuclear energy, and that's done in a nuclear reactor. So let's get started building a nuclear reactor. The first thing you're going to need is some of the pieces of the nuclear reactor. The most easy one to make is integrated reactor plating. You create that taking an advanced alloy and putting 4 pieces of copper around it. Integrated reactor plating. So let's make another one of those guys. And you'll quickly find out that they do not stack. Yeah, that's going to kind of suck, but that's alright, we'll deal. The next thing we need to make is an integrated heat dispenser, and don't worry, I will explain what all these things do, but let me just get started building them. But one of the components for the integrated heat dispenser, oh, it's dark out, let me sleep through the night. I should probably be doing these videos in some kind of world where the sun doesn't go down. But anyway, you guys have seen me build water cells. You can do it by taking an empty cell and combining it with a water bucket, putting it on a pump with some water. There's a couple ways to make water cells, it's pretty straightforward. And if you put them in an extractor, you're going to get coolant cells, which also do not stack. Oh well, that's fine. We'll let them hang out in there. So those are coolant cells. Those are also used in nuclear reactors. And the final thing that's used in a nuclear reactor, you need an advanced circuit, integrated reactor plating, a couple coolant cells, and some copper will give you an integrated heat dispenser. These things also do not stack, but that's okay. These 3 items, your integrated reactor plating, your integrated heat dispenser, and your coolant cells, are used in the nuclear reactor itself as well as in the components. Also, you're going to want to take your uranium ore and stick it in a compressor to get refined uranium. That's right, you put it in the compressor to get refined uranium. So I'm just going to take a stack of that stuff, head back over to my crafting table. Refined uranium plus empty cell equals uranium cell. Guess what? That's right, they don't stack. Oh well. So that is the 4th item that can go inside of a nuclear reactor. Uranium cell, integrated reactor plating, integrated heat disperser, and coolant cell. Okay? Now let's get to building the actual nuclear reactor itself. First off, I'm going to need a few more of these integrated reactor platings. Am I going to sit here and craft everything that I need to do? Of course not. Not in a tutorial video, of course. But I definitely do not recommend you going through and just TMIing all this stuff, because what's the point? It's a lot more fun, like I said, to play this game legitly. And if you are playing it legitimately, you'll quickly discover that these items are very expensive in terms of materials, and it does take a lot to get them built. But for the most part, you won't have to build them once you've got them. So let me get started here on getting some of these materials together, and I'll show you how to build the reactor chamber. Okay, so the first thing we need to build here is a reactor chamber. Reactor chamber is a regular machine block with some integrated reactor platings around it, some advanced alloys, and an integrated heat disperser. That gives us a nuclear reactor chamber. Now I'm going to need another one of these guys. And again, don't use TMI when you're playing for real. It makes it a lot more fun. So now I've got 2 reactor chambers. These do stack, but you're not going to have a lot of them, so that's okay. Place them in your crafting table with a generator, a couple of advanced circuits, and even more advanced alloys. If you're paying attention now, you'll realize that you've already used a lot of materials. So we've got a nuclear reactor. Awesome. Let's go place it down in the world. I'm going to place it right over here, for example. Excellent. While I'm at it, I'm going to go ahead and give myself a couple items here. I need an energy reader because I want to see how much energy this thing's producing. And I'm also going to go ahead and give myself an MFSU to store the energy in. And what the heck, some glass fiber cable. We'll just put this guy here and cable him up to the nuclear reactor. Awesome. Now if I right click on this nuclear reactor, you'll notice that it's got an interface, and it's got 3 columns, 1, 2, 3, and 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 rows. Okay, this is the interface for nuclear reactors. It's in this interface that we're going to place our uranium, our coolant, our integrated heat dispersers, and our integrated reactor plating. And depending on where and how we place these items determines what kind of reactor we're making. Let me go into some more details about nuclear reactors. Okay, so nuclear reactors, what do? They create energy. They create a lot more energy than your standard generators, these guys. They have the potential to create significant amounts of energy, as a matter of fact. But you'll notice I said they have the potential because, like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to place these uranium cells, reactor platings, heat dispersers, and coolant cells in this reactor to get a certain outcome. The outcome is determined by how you place those items in there. The other thing a nuclear reactor creates is heat, and there's an internal heat measurement that you can't see on the nuclear reactor interface, but one of the players on the forums, that's right, this is another time to introduce an add-on to this mod. There's another add-on called the thermometer add-on, and it's a very nice simple mod that was created by a character called Nargon, who is really into reactors because he also has a lot of reactor designs that you can find on the forums. What's the thermometer do? It's an item that you can craft, and when you right click on a reactor, it tells you how much heat there is in the reactor's hull. Very cool. Okay, so what's heat do? Heat builds up in a nuclear reactor, and if you get up to a certain amount of heat, the nuclear reactor will explode in a very big and very powerful explosion. Prior to exploding, it'll set fire to the landscape nearby, and there'll be a whole bunch of lava created, and it gets nasty. And maybe I'll do a quick video towards the end of this video about what happens when you overpower a reactor with uranium. Generally, you'll want to assume that the reactor will explode when the hull of the reactor reaches 10,000 heat. So, what causes heat? Basically, the simple running of the reactor. For now, let's take one of these uranium cells and place it in the reactor all by itself. You'll first notice that quickly it takes damage. That's right, this is the amount of energy remaining in the uranium cell. If we start to take a measurement, hull heats up to 45, 55, 65. Oh, that's right. The nuclear reactor is generating heat. Now it's starting to cool off from not running. We can also hook up, that's right, a redstone current. If I place my uranium in here now, it turns on, it's producing heat. If I flip the lever and apply a redstone current, it turns off the nuclear reactor. So redstone current can disable a nuclear reactor. So what kind of energy are we producing with one uranium cell in there? 5 energy units per tick. My MFSU is filling up at a rate of 5 energy units per tick. Anybody who is paying attention knows that that's pretty much the same thing you'll get by a generator all by itself. So already we're tied with a generator. How much heat is being produced? Well, heat's based upon what kind of things are in your nuclear reactor. As the reactor stands right now, we're producing 10 heat at the reactor hull every second. Anyone familiar with Minecraft knows that there are 20 ticks, Minecraft ticks, in 1 second. The nuclear reactor ticks once every 1 second. So, as we notice by turning on this reactor, we're getting about 10 whole heat per second. give or take here. So that's how quickly heat builds up. However, if we place a coolant cell next to the uranium cell, and let's check the heat now is 0, we'll notice the hull is not heating up. In fact, it's the coolant cell that's heating up. The coolant cell is now taking 10 heat damage per second from this uranium cell. The nice thing about this is when you turn off the reactor, the coolant cell will also cool off, and over time, not too long, pretty quickly actually, this coolant cell will repair itself automatically basically. It'll cool off and lose heat, and it'll get to the point where it no longer has a damage bar. So, more details about coolant cells are that, number one, they cool themselves off at a rate of 1 heat per reactor pulse, which is 1 heat per second. So, every second the coolant cell cools itself off by 1, whether the reactor is on or off. The other thing is it too can store 10,000 heat. So, as you might have noticed, it just cooled itself off, so this is now a completely, fully cooled off coolant cell. It can store up to 10,000 heat, and once it does reach 10,000 heat, it'll be destroyed. At which point, the reactor hull itself would start taking heat and build up to the point where it would be destroyed. So, that's what happens if you have one coolant cell. The good thing is, if you place another coolant cell next to the uranium and turn on your reactor, they both take damage. What you would expect maybe is for this guy to take 5 and this guy to take 5, but that's not the case. Because we have both coolant cells touching this uranium cell, it's actually taking less heat damage per cell. They only take 4 heat damage per tick. So you're taking less heat damage because you've got 2 coolant cells cooling down your uranium cell. So let's get myself a couple more coolant cells here. Probably got them in here somewhere. There we go. No, that's electrolyzed water. If I place 3 coolant cells in this reactor chamber next to the same uranium cell, they're each going to take 2 heat damage per tick. All 3 of them taking damage. All 3 of them should cool off relatively quickly because they only took 2 heat damage per second. Finally, if we place 4 coolant cells around this guy, they're each going to take 1 heat damage per tick. Let's turn it on and see what happens. Hey, wait a second, they're not really taking damage. What's going on? The fact of the matter is that each one of these guys is going to take 1 heat damage per tick, but remember, they cool themselves off at a rate of 1 heat damage per tick. So you can see as soon as I turned it off, it instantly cooled, because these guys probably each had 1 heat damage, which remained steady, and these 2 had about 0. So basically, if you surround your uranium cell with 4 coolant cells, you're not going to take any heat damage at all. It'll be perfectly stable, and there will be no heat building up in your coolant cells. This nuclear reactor would never explode. This is known as a Mark I reactor. Mark I reactors never explode. However, there's an interesting thing to note here. If we take 2 uranium cells and place them next to each other, how much energy do you think this is going to produce? You might say 10, because it produces 5 energy units per tick for each uranium cell. Let's turn it on and see what happens. Oh, we're getting 20. What's going on with that? We're also building up heat a heck of a lot quicker. So why are we getting 20 units of energy? Because when you place 2 uranium cells next to each other, they interact with each other, and they double the efficiency of the uranium cells. Basically, these 2 uranium cells are producing twice as much power. If I were to take another uranium cell and place it on top, how much do you think you'll get? If you guessed 30, you're wrong. 35. This guy is triple efficiency, so he's producing 15 because he's next to 2 uranium cells. This guy is double efficiency, so he's producing 10 because he's only touching 1 other uranium cell. This guy is double efficiency, so he's only producing 10. So that's 15, 10, and 10 adds up to 35. Of course, you're producing much more heat, and because this guy is surrounded by 2 uranium cells, he can't be surrounded on all 4 sides by coolant. So you're not going to be able to cool things as quickly with your reactor when you have uranium cells touching each other. Now we're getting to the point. Okay. Now we're getting to the point where we see what efficiency does. Also, you should know that uranium cells have the capability all by themselves of producing 1 million units of energy. So this uranium cell, if I left this reactor running, would produce 1 million units of energy. If I place these guys next to each other, they would each produce 2 million units of energy. So not only do they double the speed at which they produce energy, but they also double the amount of energy produced by each uranium. So that's the efficiency rating. So there's basically three things you've seen so far. Efficiency, or basically how much energy is produced per uranium cell, the amount of energy produced per tick, be it 5, 10, etc., and the coolant that goes in and how safe a reactor is, because the more heat it's producing per tick, the more risk of an explosion, especially once you get up to 10,000 units of heat. So this is the balancing game that you need to play. You need to decide, do you want your reactor producing a lot of energy per tick, but not necessarily being terribly efficient? Do you want it to be super safe and have no chance of exploding? Or do you want to be able to turn it on for 5 seconds, create a ton of energy, and then turn it off and wait for it to cool down for half an hour? Those are the balancing acts that you have to play when you're designing your reactor design. Two other things actually that I haven't touched on yet are the integrated reactor platings and the integrated heat dispersers. Let me get into those now. The integrated reactor plating is very similar to the coolant cell in that it can store heat in lieu of the reactor itself. So if I were to place this uranium cell next to this integrated reactor plating and turned it on, it would take damage. However, it can also store 10,000 heat just like the coolant cells does, but it doesn't cool down as quickly. It cools down at 1/10 the speed that a coolant cell does. So where this cools down 1 heat every second, this cools down 1 heat every 10 seconds. So it takes a lot longer to cool down. But the benefit of it is that the integrated reactor plating distributes heat to all the items next to it. So if I place this down here and turn on the reactor, this will take 10 units of heat, but it will distribute those 10 units of heat evenly to the coolant cells nearby. And then the coolant cells themselves cool off quickly at a rate of 1 heat per tick. Finally, the integrated heat disperser is pretty much an advanced version of the integrated reactor plating in that it too will read the heat and disperse it, but it will pretty much take up the heat of all nearby objects. You can see the reactor is off, but it distributed heat to all the coolant cells nearby. What happened is the plating had some hull heat, and this integrated reactor disperser, even though it was off, detected there was heat in the hull, absorbed the heat, and distributed it evenly to the coolant cells. So this will evenly distribute heat even when the reactor is turned off and not producing heat. So let me show you guys that again, just to make sure you understood it. If I turn on the reactor, and the hull builds up a certain amount of heat, the reactor is retaining that heat. By putting in the integrated heat disperser, it's going to disperse that heat to the coolant cells nearby from the reactor hull, which has now quickly reached almost no heat. The final thing you should know about heat is that the reactor hull itself, as you've noticed, produces heat and naturally emits it out into the air by itself. However, if you were to surround this reactor hull with water, it would cool down much faster. It cools down at a rate of 1 heat per 4 seconds when it's cooled by air, and that's for each block of air that's surrounding the reactor hull. So in this case, there's air here, 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 and here. So there's 5 blocks of air around the reactor hull, and if I dug out underneath, it's now got 6 blocks of air around it. I don't know if these guys count. I don't think they do. But basically, this is able to cool 6 units around it, but only each block of air around it will cool at a rate of 1 heat per 4 seconds. So this is actually cooling at a rate of 6 heat per 4 seconds at the moment. If you surrounded it by water, it would be able to cool itself at 1 heat per 1 second. or 6 heat per 1 second if it was completely surrounded on all 6 sides by water. So if I were to take this awesome equivalent exchange mod here and basically surround this guy with water, and don't forget the top. It's now being cooled much quicker than it would have been otherwise. So you can see I cleared out my inventory from earlier. The reactor is now producing 10 heat per second, but it's cooling at a rate of 6 heat per second. So the whole heat isn't building up too much. So, one more piece that you guys should be aware of is that those reactor holes that we made earlier in the game, let me find those guys in TMI here, reactor chamber, those come into play again if we simply place down the reactor chamber next to the existing reactor. We get a 4th column. That's right, you get 1 extra column for every nuclear reactor chamber that you place next to your unit. So if I knock this guy off, for example, and place one here, we've now got a 5th column. Here, here, on top. Not too shabby, and let's of course not forget to go underground and place one on the bottom of the reactor. We've now got a fully fledged nuclear reactor with 6 chambers for a total of 9 columns. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 columns. Obviously, you can build much cooler reactors at this point. Reactor chambers, by the way, vent 2 heat per second by themselves, so that's better than water would. So if I go ahead and put this guy in here now, this guy shouldn't be generating pretty much any heat at all. And I don't even know, can I put a second uranium cell in there? This will probably produce some heat, but definitely not as quickly as it was before. So definitely very cool. Don't forget your cabling here to run power into your MFSU, and redstone current to disable the reactor. So there we go. Reactor on, reactor off. And you can see how quickly the hull cools off with the water and the nuclear reactor chambers all around it. Finally, I'll cover the different types of reactors that you can have. Alblocka basically came up with 5 levels of reactor. A Mark I reactor is basically super safe. It'll never generate heat, it'll never build up heat, it'll basically stay perfectly cool all the time, and it will never explode. Typically, these won't produce much energy, or they won't be very efficient. More often than not, it's neither efficient nor producing a lot of energy. Then you have the Mark II reactor. What these guys are doing is they can run a full operation without exploding. They will generate heat over time, however you'll run out of fuel in uranium cells before the reactor can possibly explode. So basically, you can go put uranium in your reactor, let it run for a while, it'll build up a whole bunch of heat, but it won't explode because the uranium will run out. At that point it'll start to cool off, it doesn't require a whole lot of maintenance. Those will obviously be producing more energy and be more efficient in terms of your uranium usage. Then you've got Mark III reactors, which won't be able to run a full cycle, but can run a good amount of a cycle. It must be capable of running at least 1/10 of a full cycle to be considered Mark III, and it shouldn't melt system components. So it can run for about 1/10 of a cycle, so you'll definitely need to babysit your nuclear reactor. You can set up a redstone timer or something like that to make sure that it, is on for 10 seconds and off for, 100 seconds. And that'll give it time to run for a little bit and then cool off, and then run for a little bit and cool off. And then it goes up from there. Mark IV reactors is basically, this thing can barely run long at all without exploding. And then you've got a Mark V reactor, which is just like, hey, this is silly. It can run for maybe a second, and it's going to explode very, very quickly. It's more of a joke than anything real. So that's the basic gist of nuclear reactors and how they run. There is a little bit more to them, but I feel like this is a pretty good jumping off point for anyone who wants to build a nuclear reactor. Why don't I show you one or two designs real quick. You can go to the Industrial Craft forums, which I've linked several times in my videos, but I'll be sure to link them on this video as well. There's a lot of people who are way smarter than me who really went crazy in terms of deciding how to build reactors and making them perfect and balanced. And if you go ahead and look at them, you'll come up with some really good reactor designs, and I highly recommend you check them out and see how they work. So why don't I real quick build a Mark I and then a Mark II nuclear reactor for you guys to show you what they look like. So this is a simple Mark I reactor. What you'll notice is I'm not using 4 of my columns, which means I don't need 4 of these reactor holes. This is a simple design for somebody who's only built the nuclear reactor and added 2 holes to it so far. It doesn't have the resources to add any more. At this point, this nuclear reactor is considered Mark I because it will never generate more heat than it actually needs to. So the heat buildup here should be basically 0 thing. Let's get our EU reader here, and if you remember from earlier, I placed 3 uraniums in here next to each other. So this guy will produce 3 million EU, this guy will produce 2 million, and this guy will produce 2 million, for a total of 7 million EU across the whole run of this reactor, which will take a little while, not terribly long, but a good while to generate all that electricity. And we're creating energy at a rate of 35 energy units per tick. And you can see we've hit pretty much the butter zone. Hull heat is at 31, and it shouldn't go above that. Actually, it is. You know what it might be? Because I don't have water on all my sides. Let me fix that. And as you can see, now that I add some water, not sure if that water was necessary, but the hull heat here is pretty much stable at 34. And what basically happened is we had to wait for the point where all these integrated heat dispensers could do their job. And you can even see that it's starting to cool off a little bit more now. It's at 33, and some of the coolant cells inside have already, cooled themselves off. So down to 32. Yeah, I'm thinking this water out here helped. So definitely better. So that is a stable Mark I reactor, and it only requires 2 holes. Okay guys, so I've got another reactor design here that I pulled off the forums. This is a Mark II reactor. It will run a full cycle without exploding. It produces 50 energy units per tick and has an efficiency of 2.5, which means that this guy is producing 3, and this guy is producing 3, and these guys are producing 2 and 2, and if you average that out, it comes out to 2.5. That's how you get your efficiency rating. And this guy should build up a little bit of heat, so let's check it out. Turn him on, and you can see he's slowly building up heat. But it's definitely a slow process, and you can see it's starting to, distribute the heat nicely across all the coolant cells and whatnot. But this guy will generate heat. According to the forum post, this can run 8 cycles without overheating, so you can basically refill these guys 8 times instantly without any, lag time in between, and that's, the point at which it would explode. So it'll take a very long time to explode, but like I said, it's more efficient. And this guy's producing 50 energy units per tick. This guy's producing pretty much as much energy as 10 of these generators would produce, all filled up with plenty of coal. You'd need a lot of coal to produce all this energy. Also, this guy's going to produce 3 million, 3 million, 2 million, and 2 million, for a total of 10 million EU. So you're basically, if you plug up this nuclear reactor to an empty MFSU, once it's full and done running, it'll be a completely full MFSU. So this is a very nice reactor design. So let's close that out. There's a bunch of other reactor designs. You guys can kind of go read some more details about the pros and cons. I definitely recommend checking out the forums at theindustrialcraft.net, and you'll see a lot of reactor designs with a lot more information. I did not get into breeders. Breeders is a way of basically reusing depleted uranium cells. I might do a video on those later, but I think this covers nuclear reactors for the most part. So for now, I'm going to run far away from my base, and I will be back in a few moments. Okay, as you can see, I just built another nuclear reactor and connected a redstone signal to it, and I've got a ton of uranium cells. The redstone signal is on, so the nuclear reactor is not running. And I'm going to fill this guy up. I'll be right back. Okay, so we've got our nuclear reactor full of uranium. It's got a cable running over to an MFSU here, and I'm going to grab myself an EU reader. How much energy does this produce? Uh-oh, that's not good. Ooh. Well, that was a quick explosion, wasn't it? Well, hopefully you can see how quickly that got out of control. That reactor basically blew up within a few seconds, and it produced more than 512 energy units per tick because it evaporated my glass fiber cable. So definitely not capable of, utilizing that much energy. But that was really more an example of how much energy and what happens if you overload your nuclear reactor. This is what happens when you overload your nuclear reactor. Pretty much right in the epicenter there is where my nuclear reactor was. And you can see my game loading around me. And you can see where the terrain is no longer damaged. So yeah, that was my island that I placed my nuclear reactor in. Okay guys, I did not like the way that went down, so I went ahead and created a nice little system. This is a quick, simple toggle latch, and if I activate it with wireless redstone, so now my redstone current is active, it's going to keep my nuclear reactor off. All I have to do is click my wireless remote using the wireless redstone mod, and it turns off. So I can remotely turn on and off my reactor. Let's fill it up with uranium again, and maybe I should be standing pretty far away when I set this thing off so you guys can see the explosion. How's that look? Okay, so theoretically all I have to do is get really high up in the air, pulse frequency 0, and watch this guy blow up. So, here's the before shot. Hopefully I'm far enough away that I won't die. Okay guys, you ready? Let's see what happens when you overload a nuclear reactor. Yeah, I think that kind of says it all. If you actually look, you can see there's significant amounts of damage as far back away as here. That's obviously the epicenter of the explosion, but I mean you can see some effects of the explosion way back over in this direction, and even as far back as over here. So do yourselves a favor, do not overload your reactors, or your base might quickly disappear. Alright guys, I think that's a good video for nuclear reactors. Hope you enjoyed watching it, and I will see you all later.